Dear brothers and sisters, I speak to you with humility and sincerity. My name is Sophia, and I am 33 years old. What I am about to share is not easy, but I know it is necessary. I led a life that to many might have seemed exciting, but in truth, it was filled with sin. I worked as a stripper in a nightclub, surrounded by lights and music, yet inside, I was in utter darkness. I thought money, independence, and instant pleasures were all I needed, but I was wrong, and God showed me this in the most striking way. Today, I understand what it means to be at the abyss and to be rescued by God's mercy. He transformed my life and gave me a new chance, one that I want to share with you. From a young age, I heard my mother speak of God. In a humble home in Mexico City, she was a devout woman. She always talked about God, the Bible, and how her faith had helped her overcome tough times. She tried to instill these values in me, and as a child, I followed her to church. I remember the songs, prayers, and Bible stories that seemed so fascinating yet distant to me. My father, on the other hand, was a distant man. He wasn't hostile to my mother's faith, but he didn't share it either. For him, spiritual things held no importance. What mattered was working hard and standing firm against any difficulty. I believe this influenced me greatly. As I grew, I saw my mother's faith as a weakness, something people used to cope with problems they should face alone. In school, I was always a reserved girl with few friends. I felt out of place everywhere. I took refuge in my thoughts, dreaming of becoming someone important one day. But that loneliness and the feeling of not fitting in led me, over time, to question everything I had been taught. I wondered, does God really exist? Why do I not feel complete if He is with me? When I reached my adolescence, I began to reject everything related to faith. I stopped going to church and secretly mocked my mother for her persistence. To me, it was all fairy tales. I decided that life should be lived to the fullest, without rules or restrictions. I believed the world was in my hands and that I was the master of my own destiny. But this rebellious attitude did not lead me to happiness. Instead, I distanced myself from my mother, my family, and most importantly, from God. I didn't realize that these decisions were steering me toward a fault that would change my life forever. My rebellion eventually took me to places I never imagined. It started innocently enough, a night out with friends, one party after another. But soon, what was occasional fun turned into a lifestyle. I began frequenting nightclubs, surrounded by people seeking only immediate pleasure, and I became just like them. At the age of 20, I met someone who spoke to me about working in a nightclub. They told me I could earn a lot of money as a waitress. At first, I thought it was just serving drinks and chatting with customers. But I soon discovered that the dancers made significantly more. Initially, I resisted. I would never do something like that, I thought. But the lure of easy money was too strong. I remember my first night as a stripper. I was terrified. But the noise of the applause and the bills handed to me at the end of my shift changed something within me. This is what I want. I thought economic freedom without depending on anyone. At that moment, I felt in control of my life. What I didn't see was that this path was slowly consuming me. My job wasn't just dancing. I saw the worst in people. Men came seeking something they could never find in a single night of pleasure. And women like me used our bodies to make money, but were deep down empty and broken. I convinced myself that men were worthless, objects to be used just as they saw us. This hatred began to fester in my heart. I spent the money I earned on useless things, expensive clothes, parties, alcohol, drugs. I was always surrounded by people, but never felt so alone. I tried to fill the void with everything the world offered, but nothing was enough. Drugs became a routine for me. At first, it was social, but then it turned into a necessity. I couldn't get on stage sober. I needed to be detached from reality to endure what I was doing. I recall nights ending with me crying in the corner of my room, wondering how I got there. My mother tried to reach out to me. She called, sent messages, and even attempted to visit, but I was too far gone, blinded by my lifestyle and the bitterness in my heart. It was during one of these moments of despair, when I felt I had hit rock bottom, that God intervened in a way I could never have anticipated. Now, I stand before you to tell how I transitioned from being lost in sin to finding a new life in Christ. Let me take you through the journey of how I came to understand true loneliness and the transformative power of divine mercy. Sophia used to dismiss the Bible verses her family left for her, shouting one day in frustration, "Stop bothering me with your God. He doesn't exist, and even if he does, I don't care." Reflecting on those words now brings her profound sorrow. Back then, she was oblivious to the impending life change that would shake her beliefs. She thought she was in command of her destiny, yet she was about to discover how mistaken she was. It was an ordinary afternoon when Sophia decided to get a large tattoo on her back. To her, it wasn't merely ink on skin. It was a mockery of God, a representation of a chaotic universe devoid of a creator, just randomness. This was her way of reinforcing her disbelief and freedom from spiritual constraints. At the tattoo parlor, she lay down on the table with a carefree attitude as the tattoo artist began his work. The needle pierced her skin, and she felt an odd sense of satisfaction, as if defying something greater than herself. She even joked with the artist about what God would do if he found it offensive, adamant in her conviction that God was not real. However, an unusual sensation overtook her. A pressure on her chest mounted, the air thickening as if laden with an unseen weight. Her body went numb, and she realized this was unlike any drug-induced haze she'd experienced before. In seconds, she was paralyzed, unable to move, speak, or even blink. Panic set in, and the next thing Sophia knew, she felt as if she were being pushed out of her own body. Her soul seemed to be wrenched away in the blink of an eye. She found herself not in the tattoo studio, but in an indescribable place. The darkness enveloping her was alive, oppressive, and seemed intent on consuming her very essence. The air was heavy, nearly unbreathable, and the heat was excruciating, as if her skin was burning from the inside out. In the distance, she heard screams, not ordinary cries, but howls of pain that were both and physical spiritual. As she tried to move, the ground seemed to hold her fast. Around her, she saw distant figures, shadows of what once were humans, writhing in eternal agony. Some wept, others screamed, but all shared a desperate hopelessness. Then, a screen appeared before her, playing scenes from her own life. Every sin, every harsh word, every selfish choice. It was a judgment of her actions, and a voice echoed in her mind. "Sophia, this is the destiny you have chosen. You are seeing what awaits you." The voice was firm, not accusatory, revealing the reality of her decisions. The scenes continued, and the environment grew even more suffocating. Other voices joined in, mocking her for her rejection of God. One whispered, "You believed he didn't exist. Now look at yourself." Sophia tried to scream, but her voice was trapped within her chaotic mind. Just when her torment reached its peak, a light appeared in the distance. It was faint but brought a peace that starkly contrasted with the surrounding horror. Drawn to it instinctively, it seemed her soul recognized it as the only beacon of hope. As she approached the light, she didn't feel salvation, but rather the light vanished, and she was falling a sensation like none other, as if her soul were being dragged into an incomprehensible abyss. There was no ground, no walls, just endless, consuming darkness. Finally, the fall ceased, and Sophia found herself in a different, yet equally terrifying place. The darkness persisted, intermingled with a fire that was unlike any flame she had seen before. These were burning shadows that consumed everything around her without providing illumination. The heat was stifling, but worse was the sound. Screams, laments, whispers, all pleading for help, for mercy, but met with silence. Before her, Sophia saw a river of fire with souls submerged up to their waists, desperately trying to escape but failing. Some were dragged under by misshapen creatures, with shadows, indescribable forms, laughing at the suffering of the souls. Their laughter was like knives, cutting into every fiber of her being. One of the trapped souls looked at her with eyes full of indescribable pain, unable to speak, but conveying a clear message. Don't make the same mistake. Sophia's throat tightened, but she couldn't move, paralyzed by the horror. She continued, or felt she did, though her feet didn't touch the ground. With every step, she witnessed more horrifying scenes, souls bound to burning pillars, screaming in agony, an abyss filled with people falling endlessly. The most terrifying realization was that there was no concept of time here. It was eternal, unending torment. Suddenly, a voice spoke from behind her, deep and authoritative, yet tinged with sadness. Sophia, this place was prepared for those who reject my love. The gravity of the voice and the situation struck her with an overwhelming sense of finality and consequence for her past actions and words. You chose to live far from me, and this is the outcome of your choices. It was Jesus' voice, though unseen, that I recognized. His words pierced me like a sword. Each selfish decision, act of rebellion, and moment of ignoring God laid bare before me. In that split second, I grasped that this place wasn't an imposed punishment, but rather the natural consequence for someone who had strayed from the truth. I tried to speak, but my voice was trapped. In my mind, I was screaming, "Lord, please give me another chance." And then, as if answering my plea, everything ceased. The fire, the cries, the shadows all vanished in an instant, leaving me once again in darkness. But this time, there was a light ahead of me, unlike the previous one. It was brighter, warmer, and I felt something I hadn't since arriving here: hope. The light was so brilliant that if I were in my physical body, I wouldn't have been able to gaze at it directly. Yet, in this state, not only could I see it, but I could feel it too. It was comforting, enveloping every part of my being. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt I wasn't alone. This light was unlike anything I'd ever experienced, bringing peace, but also an indescribable weight, as if confronting something far greater than myself. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the light. Though I couldn't clearly see his face, I knew exactly who it was. His presence said it all. It was Jesus, standing before me with majesty and an authority that compelled me to my knees, even though I felt I had no physical form. Confronted by his gaze, I felt an overwhelming love that transcended my mistakes and sins, seeing instead my potential if I would surrender to him. Yet, there was also sadness in his eyes, as if each wrong choice I'd made had pierced his heart. Finally, his voice broke the silence. "This is not the destiny I desire for you. I love you, but you must decide. I've been calling you all your life, and you've always turned away. Now I am here again, offering you a chance. What will you do with it?" His words shook my very core, reminding me of all the times I dismissed warnings, mocked my mother's talks about God, and filled my life with sin to escape the void. I wanted to respond, but words failed me. All I could do was weep. Tears of repentance, shame, and an unfamiliar relief streamed down my face. Jesus approached and placed his hand upon me. In that moment, my pain, guilt, and embarrassment seemed to fade away. I felt an indescribable warmth, as if his touch was cleansing every dark corner within me. "I have forgiven you, Sophia," he said, "but now you must decide to walk with me. I cannot force you. Only you can choose." Gathering every ounce of strength, I whispered, "Lord, I don't want to be away from you again. Please give me a new chance." And he answered with a compassionate smile, "Return then, but do not forget what you have seen. This testimony is not just for you, it's for others. Tell them that time is short, that there is still hope, but they must come to me before it's too late." As I was pulled back, the light began to fade, and though I wanted to remain there forever, I knew I had to go back. I awoke abruptly, as if from a deep sleep, but this was no dream. My body was drenched in sweat, and my hands trembled. Looking around, I found myself back in the tattoo studio, the tattoo artist staring at me with wide eyes, as if he'd witnessed something beyond his comprehension. The others had gathered around, murmuring among themselves, questioning if I was all right. Trying to speak, my voice was hoarse, and my body felt heavy as though I'd run a marathon. What happened to me? I murmured. They thought I had suffered a seizure or convulsion. It was not a seizure, I replied, but how could I explain the inexplicable? No one would believe me. The memory of hell was vivid. Flames, screams, darkness, and then the light, Jesus' voice, his forgiveness. It was all so clear to me, yet I knew others wouldn't understand. I stumbled about the tattoo studio as if I had forgotten how to walk properly. In my mind, a single word echoed. Thank you, over and over, grateful to God for a second chance, for not letting me perish in my sin. Yet, I was overwhelmed. How could I articulate what I had witnessed? How would my life change after this encounter? That night, I returned home and locked myself in my room, falling to my knees in tears like never before. Lord, I don't know what to do, but here I am. Please guide me. I prayed. I felt a peace as if Jesus was there with me, assuring me that all would be well if I trusted in him. The following days were challenging. I tried to share my experience with a few friends, but most thought I was insane. Sophia, it must have been a dream or something you conjured up. Maybe it was the drugs, they suggested. Their words stung, but they didn't shake my conviction. I knew what I had seen and felt. God had shown me the reality of hell so that I might change my life and warn others. Over time, I began to take small steps away from my old life. I quit my job as a stripper, recognizing that environment was pulling me back into sin, and I couldn't afford to squander the opportunity God had given me. Though the allure of easy money was tempting, I felt that leaving that life was a way to honor God and demonstrate my commitment to transformation. It wasn't easy. I faced questions, mockery, and criticism from those who couldn't comprehend my choice. Some asked, "What will you do now? How will you support yourself?" But I was confident that God would provide. I started reading the Bible, something I hadn't done since childhood, and found solace in its words. My relationship with my mother improved, and for the first time in years, I felt I could speak to her without feeling judged. She prayed with me, and her words gave me strength to continue. Moving forward wasn't easy. The journey was fraught with temptations and the heavy burden of past decisions. Each time weakness crept in, the vivid memories of hell and Jesus' voice urging me not to forget would propel me seek to more of God's presence and trust in his guidance. Transformation had begun in my life, yet there were days when doubt would fiercely assail me. The skepticism from those who didn't believe my experience gnawed at me more than I was willing to admit. At times, I even questioned the reality of what I had endured, wondering if it was merely a figment of my imagination. One afternoon, driving home along a desolate highway, these doubts threatened to consume me. The harrowing images of hell remained etched in my mind, but the whispers of disbelief from others had begun to sow insecurity in my heart. In a moment of desperation, I pounded the steering wheel and cried out, "God, if you are real, I need you to show me. Please, let me know I'm not insane." Then, something extraordinary happened. The car radio, which had been off, turned on by itself. Initially, I thought it might be a mere coincidence, but the song that played spoke of hope, redemption, and God's unconditional love. Each lyric seemed tailor-made for my ears, as if addressing my personal turmoil. As the music played, I challenged God in my mind, questioning whether this was his doing or just a random occurrence. Suddenly, the radio went silent, leaving an eerie quiet in the car. My heart raced. Then, without my intervention, the radio flickered back to life, and a new song began. This time, the message was clear. "You are not alone. I am with you." Tears streamed down my face, feeling as though God was answering every doubt, every query I harbored. The music continued, and I posed another question to the heavens. "What do you want me to do with my life, Lord?" Once again, the radio silenced, only to restart with a song urging me to trust and share his truth. It was undeniable God was speaking to me in a way that was both clear and deeply personal. I felt his presence in the car, as if he were sitting right beside me, affirming the authenticity of my experience and his constant companionship. This encounter solidified my faith. I no longer questioned the visions I had or the miracles God had wrought in my life. It was as if He was saying, I've given you this second chance for a reason, use it to glorify me and warn others. That night, upon reaching home, I fell to my knees in my bedroom, weeping with gratitude. Thank you, Lord, for not giving up on me, for giving me this sign, for showing me you are always here. A profound peace enveloped me, and for the first time in a long while, I slept without nightmares or anxiety. After that divine intervention in my car, the weight of doubt and insecurity lifted from my shoulders. I was convinced that God had saved me from hell, not only for my salvation, but to use my story as a testament to warn others. I sought honest work, finding a job at a modest cafe far from the neon lights and booming music of nightclubs. The wages were modest, but each day brought a sense of freedom. Small victories like saving to pay my bills or resisting old temptations reminded me I was on the right path. I began to surround myself with people who shared my newfound faith. My mother, who had prayed ceaselessly for me, took me to her church. Initially, I felt out of place, fearing judgment from my past. However, I found an embrace of love and compassion instead, feeling for the first time in years that I was part of something greater than myself. One of the most significant changes was in my heart, once filled with hatred and disdain, especially towards men whom I viewed as sources of exploitation and pain. God began to heal those wounds. He showed me that true love originates from Him, and that forgiveness for those who had harmed me was essential. It was a long and painful process, but gradually, the resentment I carried for years began to dissolve. The transformation was not only internal. I decided to leave behind symbols of my old life, including some of my tattoos. Although I couldn't physically erase them, they became reminders of who I was before and how God had changed me. Instead of shame, I felt gratitude for God's mercy. In time, I felt a calling to share my story. I started speaking at small church gatherings about how God rescued me from hell. Reliving those moments was initially painful, but seeing the impact people moved to tears made it clear that my testimony was touching hearts. Today, as I share my story with you, it is with a clear purpose to warn and remind you that time is fleeting and our earthly choices have eternal consequences. My experience in hell was no dream or hallucination. It was God's wake-up call to pull me from the path of self-destruction and offer me a new chance. God showed me, in a striking manner, what it means to be separated from Him. Hell isn't just a place of fire and physical torment. It's where the absence of hope devours you, where the knowledge of no escape haunts every scream and tear. Most terrifyingly, it's filled with people who thought they had time, that they could live far from God and repent later. If you're listening to this testimony, I want to speak to you from the depths of my heart. Don't wait any longer to seek God. Don't deceive yourself into thinking there will always be a tomorrow. No one knows when their last day will come. Regardless of your past actions or how distant you feel from God, He stands with open arms, ready to give you a new opportunity, just as He did for me. My life hasn't been a bed of roses since choosing to follow Christ. I still face challenges and have difficult days, but now I know I am not alone. Jesus is with me, leading the way. If you're carrying a burden too heavy to bear, I invite you to utter a simple prayer. Tell God, Lord, I need you. Forgive me for my mistakes, for the times I turned away. Today, I choose to follow you. Come into my life and make me new. You don't need perfect words. What matters is the sincerity of your heart. I'm not here to scare you, but to encourage reflection on the choices you're making and where they're leading you. Are you ready to confront eternity? Have you surrendered your life to Jesus? If not, don't let this moment slip by. This could be the chance God is giving you to alter your destiny. God doesn't desire anyone to end up in the place I witnessed. His wish is for all to come to Him and find salvation, but He will not force your decision. Choose today to follow Jesus. He transformed my life, and I am confident He can transform yours as well.